Hello everyone, this is a video dealing with the third kind of part of the world, the less developed countries. We dealt with the advanced industrialized countries, then we dealt with the communist countries, Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, China, those types of countries. And now we're going to deal with what we're going to refer to, and I'm going to refer to as the less developed countries. Now, I don't like this term. I don't think it's a great term for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, the other term that, and O'Neill talks about this, and I think I've spoken about in class is, this first, second, and third world. And, we only tend to use the term third world now. We don't talk about the first and second world, really. And in fact, I don't like that the first, second, and third world kind of implies like a race to me. Like there's a race, like someone enters first and they get the gold, second, get the silver, and third get the bronze. And again, I think, the advanced and less developed again kind of implies this race. And I don't like that. I don't kind of agree with that view. And it's kind of, I think, very much linked to this kind of a thing that we sometimes refer to as like the Whig view of history, that history is about progress, and I don't think history is that. And if it is, there's no proof. That might actually be true, but I haven't seen any proof of it. So I don't kind of like this, but I think we're stuck with the less developed countries because generally that's terms that people use. And, you know, really when we think about most academic disciplines, we try and place ourselves within a discussion. And so people use the term less developed countries. And so I'm going to use that term. But really, I think we should be kind of thinking about what links these countries, the countries we're talking about. And it's not just, they're not, the Western European countries and America and Australia. And it's not that they're not all, they're not communist countries. They don't didn't take up communism at some point between 1917 and 1989. And so, I mean, it's not just that they're just not those, like this catch-all. Really, what I think and what I'm going to concentrate on these countries is what brings them together. And I think what really brings them together is the role of imperialism and colonialism. And I think imperialism and colonialism definitely brings together the first world countries. Colonialism and imperialism is very important for them. Um, but I think imperialism, colonialism is very important for those countries we think of as the less developed countries. And, it's very important for them because they're the group that suffers, I think, from colonialism and imperialism. But they're a very wide group. I don't think you can just say they're less developed. I don't think you can just say they're just poor. I think they are really, in many ways, different types of countries. But what really often links them are these concepts of colonialism. So I think the countries we're really talking about are normally thinking about the African countries, Latin American countries, and much of what we think of as Asia, right? So those kind of Africa, Latin America, Central America as well. But so I suppose that's South and Central America, and then Asia. So what links these countries? Really, to me, it's colonialism and imperialism. Now, people use these terms like colonialism and imperialism, and I think sometimes they're interchangeable, but I'm going to talk about them in a kind of specific way because I think that, how we're going to, I'm going to use them to try and split up what I think of as the effects of colonialism and imperialism. Because imperialism really is a term that refers to the expansion of a state beyond its borders and control of other territory. Now, this is not like the expansion of, say, the French and German states in when they join the six in the EU, right? Because France and Germany both expand power outside their state to the other five countries of the European Economic Community. That's not what I mean. What I mean is it's kind of because the EU, there's not territorial control. Really, with imperialism, I think there's territorial control. So a prime example of this would, of course, be the British Empire. Shockingly, I'm going to use a lot of examples from the British Empire because that's the empire I know the best. So I've just got a map here of this is like the British Empire at its height, right? This is all the land that the British Empire has controlled different times. So you've got the 13 American colonies, which of course they lost control of. But then, you see this goes from New Zealand, small lines here, like, uh, you know, through India, Afghanistan. I'm not sure we ever really controlled that for very long. Remember, if there's nothing else you learn, you should learn from this class. Do not get involved in a war in Afghanistan. Uh, the African colonies, small islands, you see here, Southern Ireland is included in this, and then Canada and some countries or some islands in what you would refer to as the Caribbean. I would say the Caribbean, and then some in um, South America and also the Falkland Islands down there. For those of you who remember the Falklands War, and then the what we might think of as the Sandwich Islands, or sometimes we might refer to as the Sandwich Islands, but I don't think we call them that anymore. So, you can see that Britain, the United Kingdom, this small country on the edge of Europe, right? Small, relatively unimportant country, if you think of it, but has this dominant power around the world. I mean, the interesting thing, of course, if we go back to the map, and this is not a map that you would be used to, I think. Your maps, you put America in the middle, right? But British maps and, put Britain in the middle. But if we think about it, the Greenwich Mean Time, and the time zone, we're in the Pacific Standard Time, that's actually distance from London, right? That time zones are from Greenwich in London, right? And that's because the British controlled the oceans, they controlled the waves. Their empire was an empire on which the sun never set. And this is a perfect example of that. So when we're thinking about colonialism or empire, this is the British Empire. This is imperialism, Britain having control outside its borders. Now, that isn't the only thing that we think about in imperialism and colonialism, because I think colonialism, and I will use colonialism, more technically in this class as kind of talking about a place where imperial powers have kind of settled. Remember, I think I've talked about this kind of I use the term kind of plantation, where Britain and other countries, European countries, planted their population. I think actually that where I would use the term plantation, as Americans, you might use the term settler colonialism. So really, I think I'm trying to differentiate between what you might call a settler colonialism, because I think Americans use that term. I think it's actually quite a good term, but I would, it's that plantation that settlers go there, and probably, Australia and Canada and America are great examples of kind of settler colonialism, this different type of colonialism, which is, of course, about empire and about imperialism, but it's a different type of imperialism because instead of just dominating a land, controlling it militarily, you put your people there and they become the population. I mean, if we think about it, and I know it's very strange, but if I was to ask you to imagine an Australian, how would you, what would, who would what that person look like? Well, they probably look like me. If I said, imagine an Australian, I mean, yes, one of the Hemsworth brothers, like they look exactly like me, of course, but in many ways, I think we're similar. But all the Australian actors, Margot Robbie, every person who stars in an American movie now seems to be Australian, and they all kind of look like me. Not look like me, like I get confused in the streets, but kind of look like I look. They look like a European. They look like a European really because they have been planted there. If you think about it, Australia was planted by largely British people and Irish people, people from Great Britain and Ireland. That's those two or three small islands of Europe. And, Australians were, often in the early days, people were transported to Australia, often for criminal offence. But when we talk about Australians and criminal offences, it wasn't like murderers were sent to Australia. Reason why people were sent to Australia was often because of what we can think of as petty economic crime, like, you know, uh, stealing food for you to eat. But it was often political crime, like setting up a labor union. Setting up a labor union was a crime. It was what were called the combination acts, people combining together to negotiate for wages. They got you for that. You were off to Australia, right? You were off to Australia. Uh, a lot of Irish people sent there who were Irish nationalists, people who wanted to free Ireland from British uh, imperial rule. Well, off to Australia, right? I mean, there's and petty crimes. Like lots of folk songs about this, about being sent to Australia. So when we think about like that, it's kind of like an America. America was settled by Europeans. Yes, British people, but also French, and then later Germans, Italians. Now, of course, there were indigenous peoples in those countries, right? Australia had and has indigenous peoples. America had and Canada had and has indigenous peoples. But of course, you know, the Europeans dealt with them, right? They dealt with those people, moved them out, exploited them. They came into contact with European diseases, either by accident or by design, and America is, you know, became America and Canada became white European countries because of this plantation of people. Now, that's very different from Britain's relationship with India. Now, yes, Britain sent people to India to uh, run the Indian civil service, to run the Indian army, to exploit the native population, to steal from them, realistically. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but that's what it did. It sent them there. It sent, but small groups of people who weren't really becoming Indian. They didn't become kind of the Indian population. They were there to run the Indian population, largely because, you know, it was easier to move out the native peoples of Australia and North America than it would have been to move out the native people in India. Far more people in India, you know, you couldn't really do that. So I think there's this difference, and I think it's, imperialism is the kind of broad thing. Settler colonialism is a slightly different thing. And really, the countries we're talking about are the ones that weren't part of the settler colonialist experience. Because really, if you think about it, Americans, Australians, Canadians didn't see themselves as subjects of the British Empire, as the oppressed people of the British. They saw themselves as British, as English in many ways. I'm really sorry, the so-called more of American independence is really a civil war between two groups of people who see themselves as English. And the Americans think that they're having, and understandably so, they're having their rights as Englishmen. Of course, it's Englishmen, it's not English women, because, you know, but they see they're having their rights as Englishmen taken away from them, and they want those rights. And actually, there are a large amount of support in England for the American Revolution because many people in England saw it as a struggle for English rights that people wanted in England, right? It's not just, it's a kind of confusing type of thing. But that is not the same thing that happened in the countries we're going to be talking about today and on Thursday. The countries we're going to be talking about aren't didn't have the settler colonial experience. They didn't have those things where they were perceived to have as be part of the people, part of Britain. They're really the subjects of empire in a different way, and they are exploited often through slavery, are stolen from all of these things. And so we're talking about the kind of groups of countries and the groups of people who really suffered from the effects of empire and suffered from the effects of the British Empire, the Belgian Empire, the German Empire, and the French Empire, you know. And I don't think there's any way you can get away from that. So, why is this important? Well, I think imperialism and this move for imperialism is fundamental because it does a couple of things. Firstly, we started the first one of the first topics we talked about was the state. And really, what imperialism did was it exported this technology of the state, right? The state is not a natural um, it's not a natural form for humans. Not all human societies throughout history have had what we think of as a state, right? It's not like you see it everywhere, right? You see it everywhere and all time. If we did that, if we saw states everywhere and at all time and in every single kind of human civilization, we'd say the state is a natural thing. But it's not a natural thing. It's a technology that was created in Europe. And Europe exported that technology to the rest of the world. It exported that technology to the rest of the world. So what you did was you got the creation of nation states outside Europe. And we're going to talk about the creation of went to Africa. They saw it as a way of get right. You know, South Africa became important because it has diamonds, right? And diamonds they're valuable, right? So Europe wants to have these borders, but it has to decide who gets what. And so Europe divided up Africa in some way. And so I'm going to show you kind of image of uh, kind of Europe divided up what we can think of as Africa. So let me show you a basic image. Red is the British Empire, green is the Belgium Empire, this kind of other light green is the German Empire, Italy, Portugal, right? You see, these are Africa is completely divided up. Interestingly, Britain kind of holds a lot of places on the coast historically, largely because it wanted to get to India, and that's why Egypt is important because it either went around the coast or then got through the Suez Canal. But Britain has this empire here. France has this huge kind of sub-Saharan, like North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa here. Benin, Togo, these countries down here, and then Madagascar, right? And Belgium has what we kind of the Congo or the Zaire, but now back to being the Congo. So, this is what Europe did, and what they needed to do was they needed to divide up Africa. So, think about how the European state developed. European states developed largely based on ethnic or cultural groups, right? So, what defined being English was there was some, Anglo-Saxon, then Norman kind of, identity, but there was a kind of shared language. There's a shared culture which allows England to form because they people speak the same language. Scotland is different, right? Scotland is different. Ireland is different. They speak a different language. The Welsh speak a different language, right? It enables, the creation of England or the creation of France happens because you have people who share common languages, share common culture. If you think about when Bismarck unifies Germany, Germany's quite a young country, but Bismarck unifies not the Holy Roman Empire, which you could argue should be the foundation of the state of Germany, should be what that Holy Roman Empire. But he actually just links the German-speaking people together, right? What he wants to do is make a Germany of the German-speaking people because they share cultural norms, they share a language, it makes communication very easily. It's very easy. Well, so what did the European countries do? Did they say, oh, well, so this area is made up of this ethnic group, they all speak the same language. Well, let's make that one country, and then this other area where there's a different language. Well, let's, no, they didn't. They cut up the world. They cut up to think things based on resources and what they could control. So, what does this mean? Well, think about a country like Ghana. So, Ghana has 79 different languages that are recognized in Ghana. 79 different languages, right? There is no dominant ethnic group, right? There's no dominant ethnic group. Like you could say, in Ireland, the dominant ethnic group is the Celts, right? That's who it is. Um, in Germany, it's like Germans, Germanic people, that's the dominant ethnic group. Ghana's there's no dominant ethnic group. There's lots and lots of different languages. There's lots of different cultural expectations, right? I mean, I know some people get annoyed, press one for English and two for Spanish. Well, to press 79 from one to 79, if they told you which language you wanted to be on the phone, you'd be there for an hour before you even got to which number you should press, right? This course is, I mean, I don't think like two for Spanish is particularly difficult in America, but I think 79 different languages can cause a lot of problems. There can be this real kind of different, this kind of not shared um, things. Now, that can cause problems, right? Where you have people speaking different languages. But it wasn't like the European country said, oh, well, that's a bit unlucky, right? They exacerbated these different kind of these different ethnic groups, these different expectations. The European countries, the colonial powers, the imperial powers, kind of used what we call the divide and rule strategy. They kind of played one ethnic or racial or religious group off against another, right? Because if they could get them fighting, well, then you're not fighting the imperial power. You kind of develop this what we call a divide and rule strategy, and the British are the past masters of divide and rule. I mean, that's really historically British empire strategy is divide and rule. Make sure that you have people at each other's throats, and that way you can easily exploit them. You can play one off against another. You give them slightly a little bit more, and then hold this other group down, or you can give more to the minority ethnic group to so they kind of help oppressing the majority ethnic group, and you can make them feel better, and you can exacerbate differences between them, and it works, and it's worked for lots of imperialist powers, this playing people off against each other, right? And it's a definite strategy. I mean, reason why, growing up, my downstairs neighbors um, were from Iran, right? They're Iranians. My downstairs neighbors, I've known them, God, for years, like absolutely known them for years. In fact, I watched a soccer game where Iran was playing the United States, and I went downstairs to watch it with them, right? Because, I've known them since I was a kid. So, watching this US Iran game. I talk about Iran a lot. US Iran game, right? But they actually they were supporting Iran, but they wouldn't really call themselves Iranian. They don't think of themselves as Iranian. They're Kurds. They think of themselves as Kurds, right? This ethnic group, a large ethnic group. But where is Kurdistan? Because there isn't one. You can look on a map. There's not a Kurdistan. There's not a Kurdistan explicitly because the British decided to split them up and put them into four different countries where one, they would divide the Kurds, who were an ethnic group who had, a very common culture, and then they could disrupt lots of other countries. They could disrupt Iranian politics. Kurds disrupt Iranian politics. They could disrupt Iraqi politics. They could do that. It's not just bad luck, right? It's not just bad luck. So colonialism kind of led to this creation of the state, which I think is in many ways a great technology. But it was set up in a way which down the line is going to cause lots of problems. Also, now, let me be quite clear. Um, There have been some benefits, but I'm not going to be one of these people like everything is terrible. There have been some benefits to these countries of imperialism, but we have to think about tempering those benefits. So, yes, these countries did see importation of new technologies. They were linked to the world economy in some way, which can be good. Um, they got public goods, they got roads, they got schools, and those things can be good, but they definitely came at a cost. They came at a cost of, say, forced conversion to Christianity, right? Forced conversion from their religion to a different religion, right? Forced conversion is not something that I believe in as someone who believes in religious freedom. And they did get things, they also got forced changes in, say, gender relations, that we implemented gender relations and familial relationships, which are more common to Europeans, to these places. But also, a lot of the infrastructure changes and a lot of the development of they weren't building, Europeans weren't building roads that maybe help the indigenous populations. And one, road building, I don't know if anyone has seen it, it's a terrible film. Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls, which just the whole film makes no sense because they're aliens. So does the art talk to the alien? I've never understood that film. And the monkeys coming out of the thing with Shia LaBeouf, the film makes no sense. The worst thing about that film, in many ways, I actually went to see it with a friend of mine who wrote her PhD on road building in the developing world, right? She talks about imperial road building, like empire and road building. She was a history of technology person. And I mean, she almost walks out of it. She's like, because they built this road. She's like, that's not how roads were built. The empires didn't build roads in that way. It's very brutal, the building of roads in the empire, right? It's a very brutal thing. So there's the cost of building roads, which it's not British people dying building roads going around sub-Saharan Africa. It's the indigenous population who are being forced to work on those roads. But it's not just that. Why were the roads built? The roads weren't built to make communication easy for the indigenous population. The roads were built to help exploitation of goods that European wanted and traded to Europe. So this idea that, all these things are great is, I think, is a we should question some of the benefits. All right, I'm going to stop and then I'm going to, because I don't want this video to go on too long, I'm going to make a second video because, if there's something goes wrong, it's a bit of a pain. So I'm going to stop now and then I'm going to continue in a sec. Well, I'm going to continue a second video.